Yay, here we are. How's everybody doing today?
Doing good. How about you?
I'm good, thank you. Madly rushing around as always, so. How was your week, Lindsay? We haven't seen you all week. I've seen Micheal every day, so.
Yeah, it's been good. Interesting, different times with moving more to telemedicine and not seeing people in the clinic, which I love seeing my patients. So it's felt a little sad, but we keep moving and it's working. So that's good.
Yeah. It's amazing how well it actually can work. You know, it's something you would be like totally resistant to before, but now you kind of have to do it. So you just gotta lean into it. Yeah, I'm glad you are.
Yes.
Yeah. Have they changed the rules with getting new patients yet, or is it still you have to see your existings?
Yeah, no, they haven't changed the rules. And I think it's a huge issue because it affects all the naturopathic doctors in Alberta. Right. Other provinces are allowed to. And if this goes on for months, I mean, I've had a lot of patients be very upset last week about that because where else are you supposed to turn to? A lot of people that come to naturopathic medicine feel like they've exhausted the Western system.
Right.
And that was a few cases last week where they just feel like they need to have a different perspective. And we can't give that to them right now, which is a little crazy.
Right.
So we're hoping,
Since the other provinces are allowing it, did they change it because of the telemedicine requirements right now? Or was it always that way that they could do it via telemedicine?
It's a little bit interesting because it's kind of like we have to read our scope of practice and the college has to make a decision about what's appropriate. And our college decided to say, no, we're not making like special amendments because typically we do need to see patients in person, right? We want to be able to examine them physically, make sure we're not missing something because some people will come in and what's going on is not what they thought what's going on, right? I mean, high blood pressure is an example. We take people's blood pressure every time. Well, definitely new patients, and sometimes they didn't know that they had a high blood pressure. Right. But my thing about that is, if they're having these issues, they still need to be addressed, whether there's a pandemic or not. So if they're seeing somebody, there's a greater chance that we could direct them and say, well, maybe go to Shoppers Drug Mart and get your blood pressure checked, or go buy a blood pressure cuff. Let me know what the readings are, and if there's an issue, I mean, that still could be an emergency that needs to be dealt with. If that makes sense. So I mean, I get it. And I think it's really important that like patient safety comes first. But I also think it's not ideal, obviously.
And you can't tell them to like, oh, palpate yourself here. What do you feel?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's one of the challenges of doing things virtually, right? Yeah. So
here's hoping that they'll get that changed over for you, because I think what you do is really important. And I think more people need to access it. So I'm
going to college doing with Tele-Dentistry.
What is our college doing with Tele-Dentistry?
Yeah, are we in the same kind of boat as Dr. Lindsay? I actually haven't looked into that.
I'm not sure about the new patient protocols. I imagine that I'm totally speculating here. I could be totally lying saying this, but I imagine the new patient, like especially like an emergency consult, if they had to do it by a teledentistry, that's the only way they can do it to pre-screen. So if they're going to be coming into the practice, I think you'd still be allowed to get new patients. But again, I could be totally lying right now. So.
Yeah, I just heard on the radio as I was driving to the office, it was a advertisement, I think must have been for an orthodontist. And they were saying, if you're having issues with your braces that are causing you pain that you think might make you go to the emergency room, don't call us first and they can deal with it. So
yeah. Micheal, have you had anyone come in with severe pain with the braces yet, or is that still to come?
No, I've had a little bit. It's like appliances come loose and they're rubbing into tongues and they're biting on things. Or sometimes there'll be a sharp poking thing that is going to cause a cellulitis if I don't get out to it. Yeah. That's mainly what I've been dealing with. I probably get about a call or two a day. Okay. And then I can condense everybody so far onto one day of the week, and I'll go in, and so far it hasn't been too much volume. Everybody's been really reasonable, but it's still tough. Like it's really, really tough.
Well, Lindsay, you'd be totally proud of me. I had chocolate for breakfast. And not like a chocolate nutritional shake, like actually just chocolate.
Was it dark chocolate or milk chocolate?
It was totally dark chocolate.
Oh, well, that's actually okay. Dark chocolate has a lot of magnesium, which is really good for you. And some other nutrients.
So I did that.
We won't talk about all the sugar that's in there, but the magnesium is good for you.
And there is burnt almonds in it too. So that has to count for something, right?
There's some fiber.
Yeah,
A little bit of zinc. Well,
yeah, totally.
yeah, it was terrible. I had decaf coffee for breakfast, and then halfway through the morning, I was like, I bought a chocolate bar last night. Maybe I should eat that. So yeah, that was totally my breakfast.
Well,
I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do it. If I do that, I have total crazy sugar crashes.
Yeah, but this is what happens to a lot of people. I mean, the standard, I would say maybe North America, maybe that's not accurate, maybe more Canada, the States, breakfast is a cup of coffee and maybe a croissant or, something that is pretty high sugar and not very nutrient dense. And then people wonder why they feel terrible by noon or they have horrible crashes in the afternoon. That kind of eating can also create anxiety in people.
Huge.
Yeah, food plays such a role in mental health and how you're going to feel throughout the day. But it's it's a vicious cycle because when you're not feeling well, you tend to reach for stimulants and sugar and things like that. And some people haven't really made that connection that's actually why they're feeling so terrible. So it can be challenging. And a lot of people also don't feel like eating in the morning. They'll say, oh, I'm nauseous in the morning and all I can have is sugar or coffee. That's something that needs to be worked out in the body. That's not, I'd actually prefer, if that was the case, they just don't eat anything. Maybe drink some water or something like that until we can get the body back on track.
So what's really happening? What's happening with the body then? That, if we have that sugary kind of coffee breakfast and then we have these spikes and these crashes, why are we feeling that anxiety? What's happening inside the body that the sugar is causing the body to feel that anxiety?
Well, there's a few things. One is just blood sugar levels. And because, I think we were kind of evolved to be eating very unprocessed food. Our body isn't really meant to be having these high sugar rushes really quickly. And some of the foods also can deplete some nutrients, which longer term can create some of these problems. But I think it's most of the sugar crashing piece that happens for people. And then the problem is if you've had chocolate for breakfast and I offer you a salad or an apple, yeah. I'm not pointing any fingers.
The more we talk about it, the more my stomach is actually starting to feel icky, sicky, because I was gonna have one piece and I ate like the whole thing.
Totally. So what happens then is these whole foods actually sound very unappealing because once you've had a processed food, like the thought of having an apple, people will say, oh, that sounds gross. Like it doesn't taste good to me because they're so used to the processed food, which, it's made to be addictive and it's made to taste a certain way. They add a lot of chemicals and sugar and salt, things that, our taste buds go crazy over. So then when we go to more, natural food, it really won't taste good. And I hear that from a lot of patients. They're like, ew, I don't like vegetables. I don't like fruit. It tastes so gross. If you go off of all processed food, like if you take it for a week, just cut out all sugar, all processed food. And let's say you start by introducing, like some raspberries or an apple or even vegetables, they actually taste a lot better. So it's interesting if we can kind of wean ourselves off some of those foods. But this gets again into this mental health piece. It's no different than, alcohol or caffeine or some of these other addictive things that we use. For some people, they're trying to help themselves. They're basically trying to drug themselves, right? It's no different than, people have caffeine in the morning to bring themselves up. Then they'll have a glass of wine at night to bring themselves down. And these things have been very normalized in our society, but it becomes like the uppers and downers, and people feel like they need them to get by. I don't need to explain to you guys. Most people say like they need coffee. Like if they don't have coffee, that sounds terrifying and they can't get going. It's a stimulant and it creates issues for the adrenal glands long term, and you're not helping yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, having a cup of coffee a day, I have nothing against coffee as far as if you're using it in moderation. But if I ask someone, if I said you can't have coffee tomorrow, what's your reaction? If the reaction is like fear and terror and anger at me, then we know there's a bit of like an addictive piece. Some people are like, oh yeah, whatever, I go off coffee or I won't have it for 3 or 4 days. That's great. That's fine. Like it's no different than the chocolate or any of those things. It's just if people come in and they say, I need 6 cups of coffee a day, or I just can't get going. I hear that. Yeah, it's crazy. Then we have to work on, supporting the body in a different way.
Yeah. Well, I found when I went off coffee, I got like way more hyper, which was really annoying to my friends. And I was talking faster than I ever have in my life. And
attention deficit disorder.
That's what he thinks it is.
No, actually, for real. If you have like, what is Ritalin, right? It's an accelerant.
Mm-hmm.
So if caffeine calms you down, you've got an organic ADHD, not the sleep stuff that I deal with all the time.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, there's biochemistry probably. Yeah.
But that's the funny thing. I'm not actually that way. I'm like, I can sit down and concentrate and get so much shit done and not get distracted by stuff. So that's why I'm like, your theory makes sense to me, Micheal, but I also, some of it doesn't make sense to me. So.
Well, and that's part of the problem with some of these labels is that we're all unique individuals. And so if you say, oh, that's ADHD, I mean, that will look different for different people, and different compounds will affect people differently because of their biochemistry. And so that's why we have to be careful, even with medicating. And, what you say about Ritalin is absolutely true. I mean, they don't really understand why that works, like why a stimulant would actually make people calmer doesn't really make sense. But that just speaks to like how complicated some of those neurotransmitter pathways are. And how biochemistry is influenced in ways that sometimes are unpredictable. Mm-hmm. So I think for you, there's probably just a biochemical reason why you react that way. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we got a question that came in on our chat here. Is there anything that you can answer, Dr. Lindsay, about adrenal fatigue as it relates to food? Because you're talking a little bit about adrenaline and how if you have a lot of sugar, it can create adrenal fatigues and the way it affects adrenals. So can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, the adrenals are huge for this. I mean, the adrenals are our stress glands. And what the adrenals love is routine. So they actually love if you are eating regularly. Now, you don't have to eat every, 3 hours. I have some patients where we start off like that because they're getting such frequent crashing and their anxiety gets stirred up so quickly that sometimes just really stabilizing the blood sugar levels can actually help to support them. For most people, though, just eating like 3 solid meals a day with whole foods really actually helps the adrenal. Like if we want to talk about it from a food perspective, and the adrenals love B vitamins and magnesium. So again, you can take those supplements, or you can again focus on dark green leafy vegetables, whole grains for some people, if that's appropriate, nuts, seeds, things like that. And vitamin C is actually really important for the adrenals too. So increasing your intake of those will really help support them and kind of rebuild them a bit. There are definitely people, which I would say is a lot of people, who now have more chronic adrenal issues just because of long-standing stress in their body. Mm-hmm. And so working on diet and lifestyle is huge for them, but it can take months to sort that out. So sometimes there is a need to add in some other support. So that may be through some of the herbal things that we use, some like adaptogenic herbs you may have heard about, like ashwagandha and things like that. Mm-hmm. That may be appropriate. But again, from like a lifestyle perspective, just starting to eat regularly and not getting into that pattern of like that crashing, and because that's not helping the adrenals. Like same with caffeine. So if you need your caffeine still, fine, but I would say keep it to 1 cup a day in the morning. If you are up to like 3 or 4 cups a day and you're having it later in the day, just slowly start weaning off, because going cold turkey, you'll be cursing my name most likely pretty quickly. And you don't need to do that. Just you can slowly wean down. Like if someone comes in and they're on 3 cups of coffee, say, great, just go down to 2 cups for the next week. If you feel good, you're not getting a headache, you're managing, then just kind of keep slowly weaning down. We'll often add in some other supplemental support at the same time to help them, and also get them to look at some of the lifestyle things, like if they're not sleeping or if they're not eating properly, if they're not exercising, we'll also work on those things too.
Mm-hmm. One of the ways that I find, like when I go through phases where I go off caffeine, and it's been like 6 months now for me, but when I'm starting it, instead of saying just like 1 cup in the morning, it's like wait an hour before I have that first cup. And then as you move it backwards in the day, suddenly you don't need it anymore. Because I find like a lot of times it's like that kick in the morning that makes you want to have it. But if you get rid of that kick in the morning, then it becomes just like, don't really need it.
Yeah. And some people do find that if they fuel themselves properly in the morning, they don't need the caffeine. Mm-hmm. I didn't actually look at the research, but I saw a media thing years ago saying having an apple in the morning could be equivalent to having a cup of coffee. I thought that was pretty funny. Like, I don't know the details about that, but it brought up a good point that sometimes people just aren't fueling themselves. And if they actually would stop and drink some water or have like something to eat, They might find they don't need that cup of coffee. But again, normally what we see is people are so rushed in the morning. They're rushing to get their kids out the door, to run to work. It's like they wake up and like the adrenaline takes over right away. And so the body's already in fight or flight. So it's already looking for like quick fixes. So it's like you don't really even have a chance to properly address that before you're kind of thrown into this like chaos. And then this happens for years and years and years. And then eventually what happens to a lot of people is either they get very, very anxious and have a lot of issues in that area, or they completely burn out and just crash. Yeah.
So given that this is such an ongoing problem, what are some strategies you can suggest to help people begin to repair their adrenal function, knowing that it plays such a huge role in mood, in mental health, physical health, in so many ways it cross-sects our overall well-being?
Yeah. Well, what I'll say is, and this is just from my perspective, I think it's important to kind of take a step back and make sure that we're not missing some other pieces too. I mean, all the basic things still, like everything that I said about, focusing on food and sleep and exercise and stress reduction and all those, that's always a good idea. I do think though, if someone comes in, if we're talking about like mental health and someone is coming in with symptoms of depression and anxiety, which by the way speaking of pandemics, I'll tell you the real pandemic. I mean, before this even, it still blows my mind how rampant this is. I mean, literally almost every patient I see, and the stats confirm that in Canada, the stat is by the time you're 40, 50% of people have had like a mental health crisis. And I actually think it's much higher than that. I think even though stigma is being relieved a little bit, people aren't still talking about it completely. And so for me, I also want to make sure that we're not missing something physically, like something else going on. So looking at blood work, making sure the thyroid's doing okay, because the whole endocrine system is important. So we don't want to just pull out the adrenals and say, okay, let's just fix the adrenals and everything will be okay. Hormones and your thyroid and the adrenals they all work together. And so if there's an issue in one, ultimately there's going to be issues in the other. And so sometimes it's important to take a look at all that so that you're not just focusing on one area and ignoring other things. And then same with like nutrient issues, like if you're deficient in B vitamins or even iron or magnesium or all these other compounds, you can do a lot of work and still not feel great because we're kind of missing a pretty big cofactor in getting all those things back on track. And then we can go, more into things like toxicity or biochemistry or genetics. I think because mental health, it affects quality of life so dramatically. It affects work and relationships. And I mean, it's devastating to a lot of people. I think it's worth doing the background work into that and just making sure that there's not something else being missed. Sometimes just working on lifestyle can make a huge difference. I mean, that could change things 50% for people, and that can make it livable and tolerable. And then they can have more energy or ability to kind of look at other areas. But I do think it's important to get some other things assessed. I think, in this day and age, it's very easy for someone to go to their health practitioner and for them to throw out medication right away. And there's nothing wrong with medication, and it can be life-saving for certain people. But for a lot of people, it's actually not the right way to go. And it leads to a lot of issues down the line because the root issue has not been addressed. And they're not miracle. They're not miracle medications. If it was that simple, I mean, my goodness, that'd be great. It's like, take your medication and everything's wonderful. It's just there's so many other things going on in the body and other things that get out of balance that you kind of need to take a bigger picture of that individual and make sure that you're not missing some of those things.
Well, and I think what happens is a lot of times people compartmentalize things. And there was remember the song when we were little kids, that whatever bone is connected to the whatever bone?
Can you demonstrate for us, Angela?
I can't even remember the song, but
well, it's just about getting ridiculous, like the elbows connected to the nose and you gotta do this. And...
Oh, is that how it went? Okay, I remembered it as like a perfect series of like how things are connected, not the silly part. So
that's how it starts, and then it just gets ridiculous. Yeah. That's why kids love it.
But it's funny because like when we take these medications and we're thinking that it's going to cure depression or whatever, there's all these side effects that happen in the body. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that the receptors that we're trying to target are also all throughout the body. So that's why you get these weird things that happen. And we have to remember that everything is so interconnected. So it's great to work on one piece of your health, but eventually you have to get all the pieces working together. Otherwise you're not actually going to fix the system.
Yeah. And the question is like, so if you think you have a serotonin deficiency, why do you have a serotonin deficiency?
Mm-hmm.
For some people, there are biochemical and genetic reasons why they may be predisposed. But like we talked to before about the whole environmental aspect, there's usually nutrients that they're low in. I mean, there could be like food sensitivities or inflammation or toxicity issues. And there's so many reasons why that could be showing up for people. And so to simply kind of like narrow in on that, sometimes it works well, but a lot of times it doesn't, and it creates other problems for people.
So I got a question that just came in asking about intermittent fasting and how it fits in with mental health, how it fits in overall physiologically with your diet. If you could speak a little bit to this intermittent fasting, it's one of those things that's become really popular in the last little while too. So a little guidance there, I think, could be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the idea behind intermittent fasting is fantastic. I mean, we do eat too much too often in this society. Our bodies were not meant to be, and because I know it's like a big like a fitness trend. It's like eat every 2 to 3 hours. That can create a lot of issues for how our body is supposed to work. So for people, this is like the example I was saying before. If you feel nauseous in the morning and all you can get in is your muffin and your coffee, I'd rather you do intermittent fasting. I mean, what intermittent fasting means, it just means that you are fasting for a certain period of time. A lot of people already are doing that in a sense. If you like finish eating at 7 p.m. and you don't eat till 7 the next morning, I mean, that is technically intermittent fasting. But then we get into extremes where people are only eating in like a 6 to 8 hour window. So for some people that feels really good at the beginning, like a lot of different diets and fad diets do, often because they're making choices that are smarter for them. The challenge that we've seen in intermittent fasting long term is that it is hard on the adrenals.
Okay.
For some people. So if everything being equal and you're very healthy and balanced and your endocrine system is functioning well, intermittent fasting can be great for weight loss. And it can be very helpful for energy and focus and things like that. Most of the people that I see, though, that's not a great idea for them because they probably will feel better at first, which is great. But long term, it is going to start causing some issues because it starts straining some of the endocrine systems a little bit.
How does it do that? It's not something I've heard before.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
How does the intermittent fasting begin to create strain on the endocrine system? It's not something I've heard before.
Yeah, so like I was saying about how the adrenals love routine. If your body starts thinking that you are constantly going into like kind of like a scarcity model, if that makes sense, it does actually start revving up the adrenal system a little bit. So again, if you're doing intermittent fasting in like, let's say you're doing like a 14-hour fast every day, that's not going to cause an issue long-term for most people. What I'm talking about is people that are kind of taking it to the extreme. We see people that are doing like, they're only eating 6 hours in the day. Have you heard this?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, or even 8 hours. And again, this is a very individual thing. For some people, that actually may be very beneficial for them. But in general, what tends to happen is, so they're not eating most of the day and then they're kind of eating a lot at once. And it just really depends on their biochemistry, whether that's going to play out well. But what we've seen is that it can start causing some adrenal issues. So I've had people, and again, this is just more clinically watching what happens to people long-term, which it's always interesting with all these fads, right? It's like people always feel really good at the beginning and they're like, oh, this is like keto diet, for instance. It's like, oh, this is like the savior and this is going to save me. And then it's like, okay, well, how does that play out like 6 months later? How does it play out a year later? Intermittent fasting is a bit different because, again, if you're doing it moderately, it's actually not a bad idea. So I'm not against intermittent fasting. I'm against more like this extremeness that tends to come out of some of these things. And a lot of people, when they start intermittent fasting, they're doing it for weight loss, which is a great idea, except that they take it a little bit extreme. So I get people that now they're only eating 1 time a day, which again, if everything else is balanced and they're sleeping well and their stress levels are fine, that might be okay. I mean, our bodies are very, very resilient. The challenge is most of my patients are already very stressed and their adrenals are already not doing well. And it's like one more stressor on the body that's just not working for them long term. Yeah.
Right. With the way that, like, evolution wise, we used to be like a hunter-gatherer society. So it was feast or famine, right?
Yes. Yes.
So with the way that we've trained ourselves to like always have food around, like honestly, it's so easy to have food, just the way that we live.
Yeah.
how does that go against kind of our evolutionary tendencies? And how is that messing us up?
Well, there's a few things here. I mean, the food that we have access to right now is part of our issue, right? I mean, the artificial sweeteners and the processed food and all this like food that's not normal to our body is one part of the issue. I mean, if we were out like in the bush picking berries and twigs, I mean, I'm sure you could eat that all day and our body would be fine with it. I think the bigger issue is just like our food quality and what we're actually reaching for. Like I said, humans are super resilient. I mean, like I said, I've always said, like, we're the survivors. Like, we can store fat really well. You know what I mean?
Unfortunately, I know.
Yeah. I mean, we are like the genetic downstream of people who survived crazy famines. And so we already kind of lean in that direction because traditionally, you're right, humans would go through phases where like there may not be food around for a while, right? And that's why we see, you know, some of the physiological things that we see happening. And I think it's okay to go through like periods of fasting. We're okay with that. We're like these different modern humans now where we have all these other things going on. I mean, we can even get into, you know, the way that we're sleeping or not sleeping. I don't think, you know, 1,000 years ago, people were staying up until 2 a.m. You know what I'm saying? And like doing all these things that we're doing now.
They weren't saying they're working on their PowerPoint presentation 10,000 years ago?
Exactly. Right? Like just, I mean, even just things like that, like throwing off our melatonin and all of our hormonal systems, which really are impacting our adrenal glands in a way. I mean, there was different stress then, obviously, but now it's just, it's a totally different stressor that our body hasn't really seen. So it's really kind of messing us up. Plus, we're living longer too. But we're being a little rougher on our bodies in some ways, if that makes sense. So
I wish I had you working with my sleep clinic because you're speaking to so many of the things on the other side. Because like I'm talking about the melatonin an awful lot, which then influences the whole HPA axis. And if I can get people to eat well, then as well as I'm working on the sleep side, let's just say I could really use you on my team. Too bad you're not in Edmonton.
But we could be doing telehealth for you.
That's right. See all these options now? Virtual medicine.
Yeah, we're getting there. We are getting there.
Well, it's true. And this is going to change the way that people think about how we have to access care, right?
Totally.
True.
Yeah.
It's funny. One of my exes, he works in telemedicine in the States. And so they were doing a ton of this already with like the senior living and whatnot. And now they've like doubled their capacity because everyone is doing this now, but they had already had it figured out. And so it's just some people are catching up to it now, even though it's been around for a long time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I still love the in-person. For me, like connecting with people is really important. And that's the piece like coming out of what's going on right now is a lot of my patients are just not feeling like they're having that connection and they're really wanting that. So I think connecting online though, I think that actually works very well, especially if you can see somebody. I think that there's still an aspect of that there, but yeah,
it's definitely better than just a phone call or an email. But yeah, I totally get the human part of it.
Totally.
I got no humans around me. You both have humans around you.
Yeah.
Lucky.
Some days I wish I didn't have humans around me.
I can drop someone off for you.
I can borrow one of your humans for a while.
Yeah.
Gladly.
That's amazing. Do you have anything you want to add today, Lindsay, before we head out? Or Micheal?
I mean, I think some of the basic things that we talked about are really important. I think what we were kind of mentioning last week, Micheal, about like some of like the mindfulness work, deep breathing, just learning relaxation tools, I think are really important. Food, you know, avoiding too much alcohol and caffeine and sugar and processed food. You don't have to cut these out completely though, right? And I just think it's good to take an inventory. And if you kind of like, there's a pattern here. Like I said, it's very classic to see coffee in the morning, wine at night. And it's okay. I just think you have to ask yourself, like, are you actually feeling better from this? Like, how is that working for you? And if you're like during the day, if you're just not feeling well, like your energy should be pretty good during the day. Like you shouldn't be able to enter into a room and fall asleep within 5 minutes. That means that you are tired. and your adrenals are not working well, the afternoon nap, it's different right now because everyone's kind of like chilling at home. But if that's something that you're wanting to do every day, you need to look at, what are you eating? Like, what are you having? Like, how are you fueling yourself? Is it, again, talking about mental health, like things like EPA, for instance, has been studied a lot, like the omega-3 component around depression and anxiety. And so, maybe having more whole food, adding in some fish, things like that, just see how that goes. Most people will notice right away that they feel a bit better, and that jittery feeling or that internal sense of anxiety or panic that a lot of people are experiencing, that will actually get better, even just from those simple things.
I'll add to what you're saying about the alcohol at night from a sleep side of things, is that it causes a lot more airway collapsibility.
Yes.
And the likelihood of having apneic events goes up substantially when you have a drink before you go to bed, even one drink. And so when you don't get the proper restful sleep, then your oxidative stress levels go up, the cortisol levels go up, and then everything else on the nutrition side gets thrown out of whack too.
Yes.
So yeah, from a sleep hygiene, even without thinking of the nutrition, definitely stay away from the alcohol at night. Even though it helps you fall asleep faster, the quality and the depth of sleep becomes significantly compromised.
Exactly. And I'll add to that exactly what you said about it does not help your sleep. And then the next morning, so it's affected your liver. And from like a Chinese medical perspective, this is where that nausea can come from in the morning for people. If you wake up and you just feel like, ugh, and that nauseous feeling, a lot of times that's a liver kind of not doing well, like a stagnant liver, which I know doesn't sound very scientific, but this is what can happen. It's really compromising your liver's ability to detox and to kind of get ready for the next day. So that's a lot of what we work with when people feel really nauseous in the morning, is cutting out those things at night, stopping eating sooner, definitely cutting out alcohol. And sometimes that by itself can make a huge difference to how people feel the next morning.
So maybe those are two good questions for next time we have you on, is you talk a little bit about foods with serotonin and go more into that, but then also about foods with liver health.
Yes. Yeah, liver's really important right now, even just for the viral side of things, interestingly. So it's always a good thing to be working on. I think right now it's really important too.
So next time we get to talk about the liver.
Yeah. The liver is so interesting though.
Yes, it's one of my favorite organs.
It's one thing that is regular, like the general public doesn't think about liver very much, but like when you start understanding it, it is one cool piece of machinery that we have in our bodies. So
yeah, it's wild. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up today. Thank you, Lindsay, for being here. You are awesome as always. And Micheal, great questions as always. So wish you a very happy Easter weekend, and we'll see you again next Friday.